This is Brett Peter Cowan, a murderer and a child rapist. On the 7th of December 2003, on the Sunshine Coast of Australia, Cowan, while on his way to get a mulcher from a hardware store, noticed a young boy on the side of the road waiting for a bus. It is here where Cowan would abduct the young boy before killing him and dumping his body in the nearby Glass House Mountains. Daniel Morcombe was just 13 years old when he went missing in 2003, and quickly the case dominated the news headlines as a massive search was underway to find the missing boy. Daniel planned to catch the 1:35 p.m. bus to the Sunshine Plaza shopping center for a haircut and to buy Christmas presents for his family, but the bus had broken down. When a replacement bus eventually arrived, it didn't stop for Daniel because it was behind schedule, and the bus stop Daniel was waiting at was an unofficial one. The driver radioed the depot for another bus to go and pick up Morcombe. The driver and other witnesses later reported seeing two men near Morcombe. When the second bus arrived 3 minutes later, Morcombe and the men were gone. Cowan was approached by police because of his criminal history and his proximity to the area in which Morcombe was last seen. Just days after the disappearance, however, he denied his involvement. Police had no real forensic evidence to charge Cowan with the abduction and murder of the teenager. It wasn't until years later where a covert police operation that had been used in Canada drew the attention of an investigator involved in Morcombe's case. The procedure, known as Mr. Big, consists of police officers who pose as members of a corrupt criminal gang to gain the confidence of the alleged suspect, enlisting the suspect's participation in an escalating series of often elaborate fictional crimes, particularly theft, prostitution, and the drug trade. Once the suspect's trust has been gained, the police persuade the suspect to confess to the earlier real crime. Cowan subsequently disclosed his involvement in Morcombe's abduction, and the confession was captured on video. Over the next few days, Cowan led the undercover police officers to the site of Morcombe's remains. At the site, several undercover police officers arrested Cowan. On the 13th of August 2011, Cowan was taken into custody and charged with Morcombe's murder. On the 13th of March 2014, Cowan was found guilty of all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Prior to all this, Cowan had 2 previous convictions for sexually abusing children, the earliest dating back to 1987. While on community service for drug offenses when Cowan was 18 years old, he took a 7-year-old child from the park into a toilet cubicle and raped him. In September 1993, while living at a caravan park with his 18-year-old girlfriend, Cowan lured a 6-year-old boy into an abandoned car yard and raped him. The boy was left in an abandoned car in the bush with a punctured lung due to the force of the act and several cuts. The boy stumbled into a gas station, dazed and distraught, and the police were called immediately. While in prison, Cowan's life has been a living hell. On August 5th, 2016, Cowan was playing cards with other inmates in a prison common area when fellow inmate Adam Paul Davidson poured a bucket of boiling water on Cowan after a month-long plot to scar the f***ing grub for life, Davidson said. Cowan immediately felt extreme pain coming over the top of his head and down his right side. He began screaming and stood up. His attacker stood facing him, holding the bucket in his hands. Davidson then hit Cowan in the head 3 or 4 times with the bucket before Cowan asked Davidson, "Why? Davidson did not respond. Instead, as Cowan tried to escape, Davidson threw the bucket at him. On the 4th of May 2018, he was attacked by inmates and stabbed in the ear and neck with an improvised implement and suffered superficial wounds. Later that year, in August, prisoners started a riot in an attempt to attack Cowan. Inmates heated up jam in a microwave and were planning to throw it on Cowan, who was exercising in an outdoor yard. They were also armed with a hot sandwich maker and sharpened broomsticks. Cowan was in the exercise yard when they started going off. They all went outside, a prison officer told the newspapers. However, the prisoners were stopped before they could attack the notorious child killer. It was a diversion. They didn't get to him, the officer added. Jared Fogle. Jared Fogle became a pop culture icon in the early 2000s, becoming the spokesperson for Subway after having lost 245 pounds between 1998 and 1999. Having factored Subway sandwiches into his diet plan. He appeared in more than 300 commercials over 13 years. He even established the Jared Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at raising awareness about childhood obesity through educational programs and tools presented to parents, schools, and community organizations. On July 7, 2015, the FBI and Indiana State Police investigators raided Fogle's Zionsville, Indiana residence and arrested him on distribution and receipt of child pornography charges. Computers and other electronic equipment were removed from his home. On August 19, 2015, federal prosecutors announced they had reached a deal with Fogle in which he would plead guilty to 2 counts, one of distribution and receipt of child pornography, and one of traveling to engage in illicit sexual conduct with a minor, and was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. Fogle stated back in 2007 to journalist and radio host Rochelle Herman Walrond that he found middle school girls attractive and how hot he thought they were. Children have such nice, pure bodies, he also said. Chilling recordings can be heard in a 3-part documentary called Jared from Subway, Catching a Monster, which premiered on March 6, 2023, reveals Fogle also talking about a sexual encounter he had with a little boy in Thailand. Quote, "It was amazing. Oh, it was so hot, baby. It was so hot." End quote. Despite his sentence, the justice in this case seems not to be served, as Fogle, speaking from inside prison for the first time, stated to pass time inside he watches NFL and college football, quote, "which makes the weekends fly by," end quote. He also stated, quote, "I also read the New York Times every day and read all kinds of books, especially historical fiction. I still love to laugh and smile." End quote. So yet again, like in most cases of pedophiles behind bars, it's the inmates that have to serve justice. In January 2016, Fogle was attacked by fellow inmate Stephen J. Nigg. He struck Fogle multiple times in the face with a closed fist. Fogle sustained a bloody nose, scratches to his neck, and redness and swelling to his face, according to the prison incident report. Jimmy Nigg of Denver, Nigg's nephew, said that his uncle attacked Fogle because he was frustrated by his own conviction and the fact that Fogle has been using his celebrity status and money to get special treatment. Stephen Nigg, after attacking Fogle, would get rock star treatment, receiving fan mail and other forms of love from sex abuse victims and random people on the outside. Richard Huckle. One of the worst cases of pedophilia in history, Richard Huckle was arrested in 2014 at Gatwick Airport as he returned home from Malaysia, where he committed most of his crimes. Dubbed the country's worst pedophile by Britain's media, Huckle posed as a photographer, English teacher, and philanthropist to win the trust of families in poor communities across Southeast Asia. He had confessed to abusing children on a blog he published on the dark web, an area of the internet not easily accessible to the general user. Huckle posed as a Christian English teacher to groom and abuse children, including one as young as 6 months, in a poor Malaysian community over 9 years. He also committed child abuse in Cambodia. In his blog, Huckle awarded himself, quote, pedo points, end quote, on a type of scorecard, claiming to have abused 191 children. He forced victims to pose with signs to advertise his business and wrote a 60-page guide entitled Pedophiles and Poverty Child Lover Guide. In 2016, Richard Huckle was sentenced to serve 22 life sentences for the abuse of nearly 200 children between the ages of 6 months and 12 years. He wouldn't last long in prison. Only 3 years later, he was killed in cold blood by fellow inmate Paul Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald used an electric cable to strangle Huckle before forcefully inserting a pen into his brain and breaking Huckle's jaw. He also raped him using a kitchen utensil to insert into his anus and then using a pen with a blade attached inserted into his brain via the nose in an attack that lasted over an hour in his cell. The guards found Huckle gagged and bound by his hands and feet with severe injuries to his face, with an incision made on his neck from a shank made with a melted toothbrush. The attack was described by the prosecution as a prolonged attack, also designed to humiliate and degrade Huckle. Fitzgerald, who was discovered by prison staff straddling Huckle's body and surrounded by a pool of blood, later admitted that he had wanted to cook and eat parts of Huckle's body following the attack. Roy William Whiting. Sarah Payne was a tragic case that took place in the United Kingdom in 2000. Sarah Evelyn Isabel Payne was an 8-year-old girl who was abducted and murdered by a convicted pedophile named Roy Whiting. On July 1st, 2000, Sarah Payne was playing with her siblings in a cornfield near her grandparents' home in West Sussex, England. During that time, her father, Michael Payne, was renovating the grandparents' house. Sarah's mother, Sarah Payne, was visiting a nearby hospital with her younger son. When Sarah failed to return home, her family immediately reported her missing to the police. A nationwide search was launched to find Sarah, involving extensive media coverage and public appeals for information. Sadly, Sarah's body was discovered on July 17, 2000, in a field near Pulborough, West Sussex, which was 15 miles away from where she was last seen. In December 2001, Roy Whiting, a 42-year-old mechanic, was arrested and charged with Sarah Payne's abduction and murder. Whiting had a history of previous convictions, including the abduction and indecent assault of another young girl. During his trial in 2001, Whiting denied any involvement, but the jury found him guilty based on strong forensic evidence, including fibers linking his van to the crime scene. Whiting was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 50 years, ensuring that he would not be eligible for parole until at least 2051. Life in prison for Whiting has been brutal. On the 4th of August 2002, Whiting was attacked with a razor by another prisoner while fetching hot water that left Whiting with a 6-inch scar on his right cheek. In July 2011, Whiting was again attacked in prison and was stabbed in the eye. No charge was pressed by Whiting, and consequently, a police investigation into the assault was not undertaken. A third attack on Whiting took place on November 8, 2018, when he was stabbed by 2 other prisoners in his cell at HMP Wakefield. He was taken to the hospital for treatment, but was returned to prison shortly after in stable condition. David Osias Ramirez. David Osias Ramirez was a 56-year-old convicted child molester who was currently serving a life sentence for lewd and lascivious molestation. His victim was an 11-year-old girl. He was convicted in 2013. Ramirez was killed inside his Duval County jail cell on Tuesday, July 30th, 2019, after he was beaten and put head first into the cell's toilet. Ramirez was allegedly killed by convicted murderer 43-year-old Paul Dixon after the pair began trading insults and then punches. Authorities say that Ramirez was killed after a, quote, verbal altercation became physical, end quote, according to the sheriff's department. They wrote, quote, the suspect killed the victim in his cell. A third cellmate was present and witnessed the murder, but refused to speak when questioned, end quote. Milton Orkopoulos. Milton Orkopoulos is an Australian former politician who was convicted of child sex offences. Orkopoulos was a member of the Australian Labor Party and served as a member of the Legislative Assembly in the New South Wales Parliament from 1999 to 2006, representing the electoral district of Swansea. In December 2006, Orkopoulos was arrested and charged with various child sex offenses, including supplying drugs to minors and sexual intercourse with a person under the age of 16. The charges related to his interactions with young boys, some of whom were in state care. In May 2008, Milton Orkopoulos stood trial and was found guilty of 28 charges, including 7 counts of sexual intercourse with a person aged between 10 and 18, supplying drugs to minors, and indecent assault. He was sentenced to 13 years and 8 months in prison with a non-parole period of 9 years. The case attracted significant media attention and sent shockwaves through the Australian political landscape. He was released on parole in late December 2019. On the 15th of June 2020, Orkopoulos was arrested and questioned by NSW police over further historical sex offense allegations. He was charged with a further 28 offenses from the period 1993 to 2003, standing trial in March 2023. He was found guilty of 26 offenses and is awaiting sentence. In June of 2023, while awaiting a sentence, the former NSW labor minister had been treated for multiple injuries after being bashed in prison. Corrective Services NSW said its officers initiated a medical response about 12:15 p.m. on a Tuesday at the Metropolitan Special Programs Center at Long Bay Prison after an inmate was found with suspected head injuries. Orkopoulos was then taken to a Sydney hospital and treated for head, body, and leg injuries.